Hi, I'm Jared Younger. I'm director of the Neuroinflammation Pain and Fatigue Laboratory. And today I'm going to talk about a new, very exciting, quite unique clinical trial that we've just begun. And that's using psilocybin to treat chronic pain. This is a study I'm running with my colleague Peter Hendricks, who is UAB's resident expert in using complex agents like psilocybin for clinical benefit. So this study in particular is using psilocybin for fibromyalgia pain. Fibromyalgia, most of you probably know, fibromyalgia is pain that you typically have all over your body. Instead of being in the joints, it tends to be in the muscles in between the joints. So just kind of all over deep musculoskeletal pain. If you have fibromyalgia, you probably also have pretty significant fatigue. And most fibromyalgia sufferers have some cognitive difficulties as well, something we call fibro fog, just kind of difficulty finding words and difficulty remembering things. It's not always there, but it's pretty typical. The fibromyalgia patients also oftentimes have these kind of flares, these little fibro flares, where there'll be these unpredictable exacerbations in their symptoms. It makes it very difficult to plan events because you never know when you're going to be completely debilitated by your symptoms. So that's what we're treating. There are FDA-approved medications, but there's really still an unmet need to find new treatments for people suffering from that condition. We want to know, pretty simply, if we do a single dose of psilocybin, will that have some kind of durable, long-lasting effect on the fibromyalgia pain and the other symptoms? That's the idea. Now, psilocybin is from psilocybin mushrooms. You'll hear it called psychedelics or hallucinogen. I call it a 5-HT2A receptor agonist because that's what it actually does. The other names really depend on the dosage and the intention, but it's always a 5-HT2A receptor agonist. 5-HT is serotonin, 2A is the subreceptor, and agonist just means that it has an activating effect on that receptor. So it's a serotonin 2A receptor where it's docking and having its effect. Now, these serotonin 2A receptors are located throughout your brain. They're in most of the brain. In some areas, they're relatively low density. And then in other regions, there's a kind of a high grouping of these receptors. Particularly, there's some aspects of the prefrontal cortex. There's some places in the amygdala, some places in the hypothalamus that have a lot of these receptors, and that drives the cognitive and perceptual effects that we associate with psilocybin. So we've got about, it's over 20 years. I remember being an early postdoc, like 20 years ago. And even then, there was a lot of research showing that fibromyalgia has something to do with serotonin problems. It started with maybe they just have low serotonin. And I think in some cases, that can be correct. Some people just don't have enough serotonin. And if you have too low serotonin, you're going to be more likely to experience pain. You're going to be more likely to have depression and anxiety. And so sometimes it's just a matter of increasing the serotonin. But I think in the majority of cases, it's more complex than that. It's not just low serotonin. There's some evidence that there's genetic variants in people with fibromyalgia where it's not necessarily too low serotonin. It's more that the way that serotonin is being utilized and metabolized and transported and cleared out of the synapse, there's some irregularity in those processes. So the serotonin is not being utilized correctly. So yeah, it's true. You can go to a health food store and you can get 5-hydroxytryptophan. So you can eat serotonin, or you can get tryptophan, the precursor, and boost your serotonin levels. And maybe in some cases that will help the disorder, but it doesn't seem to be the key to most of the patients. One of the problems with just trying to boost your serotonin levels is the problem may be a very discrete area of the serotonin, one serotonin channel. And if you try to boost your serotonin to make up for that problem, you may increase the serotonergic activity at all the other serotonin receptors, which were fine. And now there's too much serotonin, and that can cause side effects, the worst being serotonin syndrome, which you definitely want to avoid. And so it may not be necessarily the case that we just want to slam the system with serotonin. Otherwise, we would probably already have fibromyalgia figured out. Now, it's true that most FDA-approved medications do boost serotonin. So two in particular that are FDA-approved are milnacipran and duloxetine. These are both serotonin reuptake inhibitors, so they keep them in the synapse longer. So they have a longer chance or a better chance of having an activity at the neuron post-synapse. So, and those help. They just don't do enough for enough people. So anyway, to get back to this clinical trial, manipulating serotonin is not a new idea for treating fibromyalgia at all. The question is, what's the best way to alter the serotonin syndrome or the serotonin issue that's at play in fibromyalgia? And I think using psilocybin is a very, very different approach, that instead of just trying to boost serotonin where you have to keep giving the drug multiple, every day, we're looking for something that may actually fix the original problem. And psilocybin has a potential of doing that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So anyway, this is a randomized controlled trial. It's a small RCT. We're only going to run 20 people, and we call it a pilot. And the reason we do that is because we don't want to throw millions of dollars into a huge trial if it doesn't have a chance of working. So we run a small trial, and then we see if something interesting comes out. And if it's interesting, then we'll get more funding and devote more time to do a larger version. So small RCT. What's going to happen is 20 people enter the study that all have fibromyalgia. Now, this is randomized controlled trial, which means it's placebo controlled and everyone's blinded. So half of the people are going to get psilocybin, and then half of them are going to get a placebo. But they're not going to get a sugar pill or a cornstarch pill for placebo. It has to be an active placebo. And the reason is because the purpose of a placebo is to make it where you don't know if you got the real drug or not. And with psilocybin, there's going to be so many obvious perceptual changes and cognitive changes, you'll know if it was a sugar pill. So you'd wait an hour, and if you're not seeing interesting things and feeling interesting things, you can pretty well guess that you were on placebo. So we can't do that. We have to give an active placebo, and we're going to use dextromethorphan. And dextromethorphan, you've probably heard about that agent. It's a very cool pharmaceutical as well. It has a lot of different interesting effects. But the reason that we're using it now, or for this, is that it can also cause some perceptual changes in cognitive. And so for people who are naive to psilocybin and dextromethorphan, it'll be difficult for them to know which one they received. Now, people who are experienced, they'll be able to tell the difference, but naive individuals probably won't know for sure. And so that's the best we can do in terms of having a placebo that actually accomplishes the goal. So anyway, people are going to get psilocybin or dextromethorphan. They're not going to know what they got. We're not going to know what they got. Only the pharmacist knows, and they package it up for us, and they don't tell us what it is. And so that's part of the blinding procedure, and we'll see how it works. So they come into the hospital, and they've got a room set up for this. It's kind of an all-day experiment. And we have a clinical psychologist and counselor who are there as sitters for that process. And we just let the person have their experience on the psilocybin. And then what we're interested in is the impact on their fibromyalgia pain. So we'll track pain before the session, and then around the session, and then following the session. And then really the analyses are pretty simple. Does the pain decrease after they take the psilocybin? Now, why psilocybin? Why did I choose to do this? It's if you've followed any of my talks at different conferences, you probably know I have a list of about 100 agents that I would like to test for fibromyalgia and myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue, and gulf illness, and other conditions. And I have about 15 to 20 years left in my career, and there's no way I can get to even half of those. So I have to be really, really sure before I launch into another direction, because it just takes too much time and money to test each treatment. So the reason I picked psilocybin as one of the ones I'm testing now is because I've gotten an interesting number of anecdotal reports where people just sent me an email and said, you know what, I've had fibromyalgia for 15 years. I just tried psilocybin 6 months ago and my fibromyalgia pain is still gone. And I do listen to things like that. And with psilocybin, I've gotten a few reports from different areas of the United States and outside the United States. And it was enough, those reports were frequent enough where it started to get my attention more and more. And so I think it's worth testing for that reason. Also, my student, medical psychology student, Kathleen Hodgen, has run her dissertation on this and received information from about 100 people who took psilocybin while they had chronic pain, and an impressive number of those individuals reported some interesting reductions, some significant reductions in their pain. And we'll probably talk about that study. It's its own study. That dissertation has already been defended, and we'll write the paper up and get it out. So there's some such interesting stories came out of that dissertation, but it just gives me more reason to do a clinical trial to see if this actually does work. So that's one reason, just so many interesting anecdotal reports saying that it could work. And then also I've been really impressed by recent evidence suggesting that psilocybin reduces inflammation throughout the body and potentially the brain in some very unique ways. It seems to reduce interleukin 6 and C-reactive protein. And these are two agents that if you have high levels, they're pretty nasty. They can cause a lot of effects like pain and fatigue issues and cognitive impacts, among other things, motivational changes. And so psilocybin looks like it can reduce this inflammation. But what's really interesting about psilocybin and these inflammatory things is that it seems to last even when the psilocybin is gone from your system. There's lots of drugs I can give that can reduce inflammation, but only as long as that drug is still in your system. Once it clears out, your inflammation comes back. And, that's typical in medicine, but this seems to be the exception. Now, preliminary evidence, but the things I've seen suggest that the psilocybin's long gone, but the inflammation stays suppressed for days and maybe weeks. We don't know exactly how long. So anyway, the idea or the possibility that we can give a drug and have a durable impact on the symptoms is very exciting, because that suggests that instead of just covering up the symptoms, we're actually having an impact on the original problem. So I'm very interested for those two reasons. Anyway, to wrap this up, let me tell you what might happen. We're going to run this trial. It'll probably take most of 2024 to do it. And then we'll look at the results. What's going to happen? First of all, I have no idea what's going to happen. Any good scientist would say, we don't know. We have to run the study and find out. That's why we run studies, because we can't know until we actually do it and find out. Maybe nothing will happen. We run the people and there's nothing interesting at all. In that case, we'll drop that idea, move on to something else. That's what we do as scientists. More likely is maybe something will happen. There'll be some reduction of pain, but it's too weak to really justify putting lots of money into pursuing it further. So maybe it reduces pain by 10%. It's like, oh yeah, that's something, but maybe it's not interesting enough. Or maybe it reduces pain a lot, but only for a short period of time. It only lasts as long as the psilocybin's in your system, and that's not very exciting if that happens, because then you would have to dose someone on psilocybin every day at a full dose, which is not, we can't do that because there's too many impacts on cognition to do that. So now if that happens, we may look at tweaking the dosage, or we may look at a different kind of paradigm, like instead of taking a single macro dose, maybe taking daily or every other day micro doses. So you can actually go to work, function normally, and still take psilocybin. And maybe that would be enough to reduce the pain. I have no idea if that's the case. That's just another alternative direction. So it could do that, or we may find that it works really well. And of course, that would be the exciting outcome. If all the fibromyalgia patients under psilocybin have a impressive reduction of their pain, that would be incredible. Or if just a subset of them have a really positive response to it, that would be exciting as well. So we don't know, but we run the study, we look at the data, and then we report which one of those three ends up happening. So anyway, if people have, in terms of, this is not a recruitment video. I just want to catch everyone up on all the different studies I'm running, and chose to talk about this one because we just ran our first participant a week ago. So I wanted to talk about this, but if people do want to participate, it is possible. We're going to be actively recruiting for the next several months. So if someone has fibromyalgia, or if they suspect they have fibromyalgia, given the symptoms that I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, they may be able to participate. There are some medication exclusions, like if you're taking a monoamine oxidase inhibitor or something that raises your serotonin a lot, wouldn't be a good idea to do this study because psilocybin might raise serotonin as well. So we don't have both of those happening at the same time. There's some comorbid conditions that people can't have, some autoimmune conditions, some neurodegenerative conditions. But anyway, if someone has fibromyalgia, they can do a screening and can find out if they're eligible for the study. Now, this study is only going to take people who are close to our center at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. So they have to be pretty much around Alabama because there's a few visits involved. I try to do as many studies as I can decentralized or mobile, which means people throughout the United States can participate. But this is an exception. It's a Schedule I pharmaceutical. It's too experimental, so you have to be close to this center in order to be in this trial. So if you are interested, if you're close to UAB and interested in finding out more, I will put in the description below, I'll put an email address where you can send your email address, and I'll put you in contact with Lindsay Heron, who's our coordinating counselor on this project. The email is only for people who are interested in participating. We won't be able to get back to just general questions or do any consulting or anything like that. So if that email address is down there, it's for people interested in being participants. And I'll keep that there until the study closes, and then I'll probably take that out of the intro description so people know that the study is done. Last thing I'll say is, if you can't participate in this trial because you're not close enough, but you're interested in being in a psilocybin fibromyalgia trial or something like that, I encourage you to go to clinicaltrials.gov. That's the official site where, in my view, any credible clinical trial should be registered. So you just go on clinicaltrials.gov and type your disease or your condition or your symptoms, and you'll get a list of every open clinical trial happening, and you can find out if there's any close by, and maybe you'll luck out and there's one close by that you can participate in. So that's really it. Just wanted to let you know that we just started this trial, and I'm very interested in seeing what happens. The next time I talk about this trial will probably be when we're looking at the preliminary results, where basically I'll show you what happens and I'll let you know if it works. If it does work and we get a really knock the ball out of the park and it had a really impressive response in fibromyalgia, we'll probably explore using it in other related conditions as well. So if you don't have fibromyalgia, but if you have something similar, it's possible in the future you may be able to participate in a trial then. So keep an eye out here. Track my emails. Again, I'm sorry, my videos, I'm doing them every week, once every week. That's all I can find time to do. But keep an eye out here for updates on this. And when we get done with the study, probably later half of this year is my guess. Trials always take a long time to do, but I would say by the end of 2024, we will be done with this, data analyzed, and reports coming out. So, track the information here, and as soon as we run the results, I will probably put it here first before it gets anywhere else, especially, before it even gets out in the scientific publications. So follow the work here, and hope to see you again soon, and thanks for listening.